Why do Filipinos always find a way to smile? Think about every typhoon you have ever watched on the news. A super typhoon destroys an entire town, and just days later, someone is already cooking food for their neighbors. A volcano erupts, families lose everything they own, yet before long children are laughing again. Basketball has returned to the streets, and life somehow begins moving forward. An earthquake shakes an entire community, homes collapse, businesses disappear. But when the cameras arrive, they capture something the rest of the world struggles to understand. People helping each other, sharing food, smiling, and refusing to give up. Around the world, this has become one of the defining images of the Filipino people. But here is what most people do not know, and what scientists only recently confirmed. That smile is not denial. It is not performance. It is not simply optimism. For years, many researchers assumed resilience was mostly a matter of personality. Instead, they discovered something far more surprising. Researchers studying resilience in disaster-prone communities kept finding the same pattern. In the Philippines, resilience was driven not only by the individual, but by families, communities, and shared culture. Stay with us, because what they discovered explains something your family has been carrying for thousands of years. Before we continue, our goal on this documentary is to reach 500 likes. If someone has ever told you that Filipinos always find a way no matter what, hit that like button now and share this with every Filipino who deserves to know the science behind their own strength. Subscribe if you are new here. We cover Filipino history and science that schools never taught us. To understand why Filipinos are so resilient today, you first need to understand where your ancestors chose to build their lives. Look at the Philippine archipelago from space. More than 7,000 islands scattered across the Western Pacific. Beautiful, but also one of the most geologically dangerous places on Earth. This region sits directly on what scientists call the Pacific Ring of Fire, with more than 20 active volcanoes, frequent earthquakes, and powerful typhoons arriving every single year. Floods, landslides, tsunamis, generation after generation, the people living on these islands never experienced centuries of uninterrupted peace with nature. Nature constantly tested them, and every generation faced the same question: can you recover, or can you not? Modern evolutionary scientists now understand something that changes how we see this entirely. Evolution does not only shape our bodies, it shapes behavior, not by creating perfect people, but by favoring the traits that improve survival across generations. Think about two ancient communities living beside each other. One that gives up every time disaster strikes, and one that immediately begins rebuilding together. Which community survives for another 100 years? Which raises more children? Which passes its traditions into the future? Survival does not always reward the strongest. Sometimes it rewards the people who recover fastest. And for thousands of years, recovery was not an occasional event in the Philippine Islands. It was life itself. And in just a moment, you'll see the scientific study that shocked researchers, because it explains why Filipino families recover differently from almost everyone else. Now here is where the science becomes remarkable, and where your own family enters the picture. A 2026 peer-reviewed study published in the journal Environmental Hazards specifically studied Filipinos living in flood-prone communities across multiple generations and found something that surprised the researchers. Resilience among Filipinos was not operating as a personal trait at all. It was operating as what the scientists described as a dynamic, socially embedded process, shaped by communal solidarity, faith, and shared necessity. In other words, Filipino resilience is not something individuals carry alone. It is something that activates between people. Think about your own family for a moment. Think about who the strong one is. The person everyone turns to when something goes wrong. The one who does not panic, who starts moving, who starts organizing, who makes sure nobody goes without. In almost every Filipino family, there is someone like that. And here is what science now tells you about where that person came from. They were not born different from everyone else. They were built by the same process that built your entire bloodline across 50,000 years of learning to survive together. Because the Filipino resilience story does not begin with typhoons or colonial history. It begins with one of the greatest migrations in the entire history of the human species. More than 50,000 years ago, the earliest modern humans reached what we now call the Philippine archipelago, and they arrived not by accident but by intention, crossing open water with no engines, no metal ships, no maps, no satellites, only observation, courage, and the determination to keep moving forward. Archaeologists from Ateneo de Manila University have now confirmed through 15 years of excavation that these earliest Filipinos had advanced maritime technology over 35,000 years ago. Bone fishing tools for deep ocean hunting, obsidian cutting tools whose chemical composition proves they were traded hundreds of kilometers across island chains, and shell adzes that appear across Papua New Guinea over 3,000 kilometers away. These were not isolated primitive communities. They were connected, mobile, technologically sophisticated people who understood one thing above everything else. You survive by moving toward difficulty, not away from it. Then around 5,000 years ago, another chapter began. The Austronesian expansion, thousands of skilled seafarers spreading from Taiwan through the Philippine Islands and outward across the Indian Ocean and the Pacific. They studied stars, ocean currents, wind patterns, bird migrations, and the color of the water itself. Every successful voyage required careful preparation and total cooperation. Every mistake could mean death. The people who survived were not the most reckless. They were the most observant, the most prepared, and the most committed to each other. Generation after generation, those traits were passed forward, not just in stories, but in behavior that gradually became culture, and culture that gradually became identity. Researchers studying disaster psychology have found something that explains the next layer of this story. People who repeatedly overcome adversity together often develop stronger social trust than populations that rarely face major challenges, and that social trust changes how their brains respond to future stress. Among Filipinos, that trust has a name most people know, but few understand at a scientific level: Bayanihan. Most people have seen the famous image of neighbors carrying an entire house together, but that image represents something much larger than community spirit. It represents a neurological phenomenon that modern psychology has now documented extensively. When people receive genuine emotional support from trusted family or community members during stressful situations, the brain measurably reduces the production of cortisol, the stress hormone that, when chronically elevated, has been linked to heart disease, depression, anxiety disorders, weakened immunity, and accelerated biological aging. The human body was never designed to carry stress alone. It was designed to share it. And Filipino culture built a system for sharing stress that operated at a community level. long before any laboratory ever measured what that sharing was doing inside the human body. Think about the last time something went seriously wrong in your family. Who arrived without being asked? Who brought food before anyone thought to request it? Who started working before anyone gave instructions? That behavior, which feels so natural it barely registers as extraordinary, is the product of a social system that your ancestors refined across generations of survival. It was never just kindness, it was the most advanced stress management technology ever developed, running continuously inside every Filipino community on Earth. Now here is where everything changes. Up to this point, we have been talking about family, history, and community. But none of that explains the one Filipino word that completely changed how psychologists understand resilience. In fact, many researchers misunderstood it for decades. Bahala na. Most outsiders translate it as fatalism, as simply accepting whatever happens. But Filipino historians and psychologists have argued for decades that this translation is deeply incomplete. Modern neuroscience now helps explain why. Bahala na does not mean surrender. Modern neuroscience now recognizes it as one of the most effective ways humans cope with uncertainty. It means, I acknowledge that I cannot control what is coming, and I am going to act anyway. Researchers studying what they call action orientation versus state orientation have found that people who can accept uncertainty without being paralyzed by it consistently outperform those who cannot move forward until they have guarantees. Bahala na is the ancient Filipino formulation of a psychological principle that modern performance psychology spent decades trying to teach: the ability to act with full commitment in the absence of certainty. Think about every Filipino who has ever left home to work abroad. Millions of mothers and fathers who packed a single bag and flew to countries where they did not speak the language, where they knew nobody, where they had no guarantees of anything, only the belief that acting was better than waiting. That is Bahala na in its truest form, not surrendering to fate, but choosing to move forward because standing still guarantees failure. Your ancestors developed that philosophy not as comfort, but as a survival strategy in a world where certainty rarely existed. Developmental psychologists have spent decades studying why some children become remarkably resilient despite hardship. Again and again, one factor rises to the top: a stable, supportive relationship. In the Philippines, that support rarely comes from one person alone. It is shared by parents, grandparents, siblings, aunts, uncles, cousins, and godparents, creating a network of emotional security that surrounds children from the very beginning. Think about your own grandmother. Think about what she survived, what she sacrificed, and what she quietly built for the next generation. Research shows that children learn resilience not from lectures but from watching the people they love face hardship with courage. Over time, those everyday acts become their own instinct. Then came another test. Spain ruled the Philippines for more than 3 centuries, followed by American rule and the Japanese occupation during the Second World War. Every generation faced the same challenge: survive without losing who you are. Colonial powers changed institutions, language, religion, and government, yet families endured. Communities endured. Traditions endured. Historians often ask what colonialism changed. Just as important is what it failed to erase. Today, more than 10 million overseas Filipino workers live in nearly 190 countries. Millions of parents spend years away from their children, missing birthdays and ordinary moments in the hope of creating better futures. Researchers studying post-traumatic growth have found that hardship can strengthen purpose, deepen relationships, and build emotional resilience. For many OFWs, distance has not weakened family bonds. It has often strengthened them. And then there is laughter. It appears everywhere in Filipino life, even during difficult times. Neuroscience shows that shared laughter lowers stress, strengthens social bonds, and helps regulate emotion. It does not erase pain, it helps people carry it together. That is why humor has long been one of the quiet tools of Filipino resilience. Now step back and look at the whole picture. There is no single secret behind Filipino resilience. It is not one extraordinary gene, one personality trait, or one cultural tradition. It is the result of thousands of years of adapting to uncertainty, families that stayed together, communities that rebuilt together, and values like Bahala, Bayanihan, and Kapwa that encouraged courage, cooperation, and hope when certainty was impossible. Science did not uncover one magic explanation for why Filipinos smile after typhoons. It revealed something far more powerful. Resilience grows where biology, psychology, family, culture, and history strengthen one another across generations. Now think about your own family tree. Somewhere in it was someone who survived a storm, a war, poverty, or separation. Someone whose sacrifices gave the next generation a better chance. Their resilience did not end with them. It became the foundation on which your life was built. Modern science is beginning to understand something your ancestors understood without laboratories. Human beings survive best when they survive together. That truth lives in Bayanihan, in Kapwa, in family gatherings where no one leaves hungry, in neighbors who arrive before they are called, and in every Filipino who quietly says, "We'll figure it out," even when the path ahead is uncertain. Perhaps resilience is not about never breaking. Perhaps it is about refusing to stay broken. If that is true, then generations of Filipinos have been proving it for thousands of years. One storm, one family, and one quiet act of courage at a time. If this documentary changed how you see your own family, share it with someone whose quiet strength helped shape your life, a parent, a grandparent, or a friend working far from home. And watch our documentary on why Filipinos don't look their age, where another remarkable story hidden within Filipino history, biology, and culture awaits. Because resilience is not just your history, it is your inheritance.